Hello, the following is a short, edited collection of interviews from the 2024 through 2026 cohorts of GASP's Fresh Voices for Clean Air program. The program encourages high school students to engage with the long history of air pollution in and around Pittsburgh through an oral history project. This collection is not every interview, nor is it the full interviews, so if it strikes your interests, you are encouraged to find the Fresh Voices website, which is home to all of these interviews in full, as well as those not featured here. Now, without further ado, I introduce you to the following three-part collection of 2024 through 2026 interviews.
I experienced air quality issues when I was a child, and I commented on them and we discussed it. I was born in 1946, and I lived in Mount Washington, which is a pretty urban part of the city. I remember my grandmother would wash the curtains every week, and by Wednesday they would be gray. And some of my earliest memories were they would stretch the curtains on pin things. She had lace curtains like this, and you stretch them on pin holders to get them to dry so they don't crumple up like that. I remember being a very small child taking the bottom row and hooking the pins to the lace along the very bottom edge. So you can imagine if the curtains got gray within the course of a week, what was going on in your lungs. We hung the clothes under the porch because if you hang them out in the yard, they would get cinders on them. And if you look at the fashions of the day in the 50s, the men wore hats with brims. You know why? Get cinders on your face. And one of the things the advertisements would spend a lot of time on were ring around the collar, because your neck would get black. And every man went to an office with an extra shirt in their briefcase. So you would change your shirt at lunchtime. And so for every man in the house, we ironed 14 shirts a week because they went through 2 shirts a day because they got so black from the smoke and the soot.
I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I personally experienced it with, the steel mills. You could smell it going through the Squirrel Hill tunnels. When you got to the other side, it smelled like rotten eggs from the sulfur from the steel plant. When I was at Pitt, my windowsill would be just full of soot by the end of the day. There were buildings around, like one side of Pitt, the side facing it was all black. There were churches in the Carnegie Museum that I thought they were black stone until after the mills closed down, they scrubbed them all and they were light colored stone. So I grew up to it and was used to it. And even though I lived in the suburbs, I was somewhat affected by it.
So when we moved to Ben Avon, it became an issue because at that time, there were pretty much the same industries as there are now, but there was also the Shenango Coke plant. And there were kind of identifiable odors coming from other industries, but it seemed like the most profound and easiest to identify were the emissions from Shenango. The plant closed like 10 years ago, and it was really out of compliance on and off before that. So when we lived in Ben Avon, which was 86 to 2004, it was so bad that we had to close our windows. It interfered with outdoor activities, with letting my son be outside as much as he wanted to and things like that. But the first thing we noticed was a couple years after we moved there, all kinds of soot on our deck. And after kind of a couple different false starts with different organizations, I was put in touch with the health department, and they put this kind of primitive monitor on our deck that more or less just collected the soot. and they were supposed to analyze it, but that kind of didn't work out well. It ended up that they checked it so infrequently that it was like this plastic container. It eventually just fell off the deck, and I don't even remember what happened to it. And then along the way, I realized that it wasn't just that it was interfering with, our day-to-day activity. It was actually interfering with how we felt. So it took a long time to realize that.
I had a friend that had a hot air balloon, and I had the opportunity to go up with him a number of times. And one time, I guess we took off maybe 20 miles or so south of Pittsburgh, and we went up, we got up a couple thousand feet, and all of a sudden, the sky became blue, and everything was really clear, and down below was all this brown smoke. I mean, it was a real clear evidence of this smog that's just there, and you had never even noticed it. And I sort of remember that and impressed by that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people kind of just get used to it. I think we, as people, think that what we have is normal. So maybe we don't even think whether the air quality is bad or good. So there are probably a lot of people, especially if they weren't affected by it like I was, then maybe didn't even notice or think they had a need to talk about it. Because I grew up with asthma, I knew about it pretty young. It was triggered by different things, so sometimes by allergies and sometimes by activity. So like if I ran or something, then that would hit it off. But also I could kind of tell, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but sometimes they have days where they say like the air quality is not that great. And it's sometimes like on the news, or it'll be on your weather app on your phone. It was harder to breathe on those days.
I remember as a kid learning about it in school about how the air quality was poor here in Pittsburgh, Steel City. I knew that. I would say though, in my adult years, I feel like the air quality has changed again, and it's not as good. I developed allergies from having mold in one of my salons, and that's when I really noticed the air quality. And every year, like it seems to either fluctuate but it never gets better, and it seems to get progressively worse. And that is the one thing I can say. It's no smog or anything like that, but it's just like there's something in the air that is like not that great.
Saying about air, I think there seems to be an awareness about the impact of like air quality, air pollution on our health. Well, certainly like people have talked about how Pittsburgh historically has been a very polluted place, and in more recent years it has improved greatly with steel mills closing and less like soot and particulates. I think there's still an awareness that the air is not good, that we still have air quality issues to account for. So I think, I guess what I think about is how what's new and maybe what people are talking about that's different are the technological advances in energy and transportation. So now that we have more clean air, affordable like clean air energy options like solar, wind, and how moving away from fossil fuels use can affect our health. I think I hear that in conversations. And then along those lines, electric vehicles, improving air quality from transportation, I think is something that people are talking about.
Well, not just the air, but the steel mills polluted the water too. But then I also remember the air being cleaner suddenly. And that's when they started to scrub the buildings. And there was a growing awareness when that changed, that people thought, things were better, but they weren't. Because there were still places where some mills were still open and blowing things, especially out of the Mon Valley, is what people call it. The mills were up and down the rivers, which is why Pittsburgh didn't become a rust belt as much as some of the other cities, because it was shared. Now they're all depressed areas. up and down the Mon, the Ohio, where all the mills were, the air would still be bad. Everybody said that, I don't know that the documented proof on this, but everyone said that the steel mills got money to modernize them and make them cleaner, but they didn't spend the money on that. And then they started closing one by one because they couldn't be profitable and because they couldn't meet EPA standards.
Regulations, if they're followed, there's a procedure for redoing regulations. You can't just strike them out and have them gone. Some of them are required because they're in statutes, and a statute requires implementation in regulation. So if the statute stands, the regulation can be interpreted, but you can't just strike it down because you don't like it. Now, the level of attention to enforcement is at the discretion of the administrator. And those vary tremendously within, an administration to administration. So that can happen quickly. But fundamental changes of the structure of the regulation depends on changing the law. So I think deregulating an industry is going to require enacting new laws. And that doesn't happen instantly. Failing to enforce, failing to fund, overwhelming administrations so that they have too few people to accomplish the tasks, those things can happen pretty quickly. I think there are two things. One is the cultural shift from the convenience of a use once and throw away society drives a lot of the things that are causing the air pollution and the climate issues. So coming to an understanding of becoming more conserving in resource use as a general societal norm, so that you begin using dishes instead of throwaway paper. You buy things in bulk in returnable containers instead of wrapped in plastic. Begin to take that step of normalizing the resource conservation and reduction of use of the fossil extractive materials. I think that's a very important piece of this. And that only happens when a larger proportion of the society recognizes the value of it. So buying things that last instead of buying things that you use once and throw away. It has been a part of our culture almost forever until modern times. And from the 50s, early 60s even, when the throwaway economy really became much more ingrained. Fast food, prepackaged food, things that are wrapped in plastic and shipped from other parts of the world and arrive in bags and bags of layers of bags, and that kind of stuff didn't happen when we didn't have a global economy. I think that makes a difference is just the lack of economic value of continuing the extractive industry process. We've had 24 storms of $1 billion or greater in just 1 year. The cost of that is unbelievable in terms of an aggregate. The insurance industry is already beginning to remark on that, to adjust to that. It's making housing less affordable. It's making other kinds of things less available that were routinely available. It's making food more expensive because 45% of our farmland is in drought. That has an effect on your food availability and prices. So the economy is beginning to reflect the reality of the climate change, and that will cause a shift. But people have to make that connection. They have to understand that, oh yeah, this stuff is expensive because there are fewer places that grow it, and it has to be shipped from farther away. And, at some point, reality sets in.